Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everybody in the franchise world. My name is Stan Friedman, and this is Franchise Today. And it's the second consecutive week, actually, of yours truly, minus my co-host, Paul Segreto, who's winding up the wedding celebration of his son, Brad, and his beautiful bride, Angela, down in the Cayman Islands. Great-looking pictures, Paul. Enjoyed every bit of them on Facebook, and I can definitely see lots of love there. But come on back, buddy. We need to hear these podcasts are a lot more fun when you and I get to banter. Today's guest coming up in just a few minutes is known far and wide in the franchise world as he's a guy who's worn many hats in this business. I'm talking about none other than Ron Feldman, Chief Development Officer at FRANdata, Principal Partner and Chief Brand Strategist at Franchise America Finance and the Siegel Financial Group back in Philadelphia. Without a doubt, we could probably do an entire hour with Ron on any number of topics, from fine wine, to political advocacy, but I'll do my very best to touch on all of those points, albeit from 30,000 feet today, when we get to our guest segment with Ron Feldman, who's coming up soon, right here on Franchise Today. But first, let's take a look at the front of the house as I thank last week's guest, another guy that's become a friend over the years and who continues to weave into the life of many people in the world of franchising and technology, speaking none other than about Mike Rosman, CEO and co-founder of BoFly. If you missed the episode last week, be sure to download it at iTunes and learn a little bit more about how BoFly is further advancing the selection process for their clients with their Be Qualified tool. You can learn more about that. Just download it from iTunes, and if you didn't get to enjoy the episode last week, you'll find it there. Also, in the front of the house, Franchise Today wishes to congratulate some folks, starting with from my hometown. Multi-unit franchisee David Barr, recently elected as Secretary of the IFA, and along with our kudos, there are 10 new board members that Franchise Today would love to congratulate and share with you who they are. Their terms beginning in February 2016 at the upcoming IFA convention. John Draper, CEO of the Veridian Group, fellow board member with me on the IFA Diversity Institute. Congratulations, John. Tarek Fareed, CEO of Edible Arrangements. Sherry Fishman, President and co-founder of Fishman PR. Mike Hickey, Executive Vice President of Ecolab. Ray Jackson, Senior Vice President of Business Development and Industry Affairs for Coca-Cola. Our good friend David McKinnon, Senior Advisor to the Dwyer Group, and, of course, serial entrepreneur and Entrepreneur of the Year award winner recently. We also congratulate our friend John Rachi, CEO of Title Boxing Club, Charles Stempler, Alpha Graphics multi-unit franchisee, Jeffrey Tews, a Bright Star and Mr. Handyman, multi-unit franchisee, and Simone Wu, Senior Vice President and General Counsel to Choice Hotels. Congratulations to one and all. These are your 10 new board members to the 2016 IFA Board of Directors. Last week, I came to you live from the Franchise Update Conference in my hometown of Atlanta. And this week, we join you from Dallas, Texas. I'm attending and sponsoring the IFA's FranTech conference here in Dallas. And it's been quite a conference so far. We opened up yesterday with Linda Schaub, who's the VP of Marketing for Interim Healthcare. And Linda also kicked off the conference wearing her other hat as chair of the FranTech Task Force for IFA. Yesterday, we had a keynote presentation delivered by Mike Walsh, who is the CEO of Tomorrow, a global consultancy that designs business for the 21st century and kind of teaches the difference between the world we live in and customers as we currently know them and what we can expect as we move further into the 21st century. Amazingly, he brought some very high-level topics down to bite-sized nuggets that everyone was able to digest. This included just some bullet points on how future customers will think, how they'll talk and transact business much differently than they do so today. He shared some lessons on disruptive innovation from fast-growing emerging markets He talked a lot about how to leverage enterprise social networks to solve real business problems, and talked some about what it will take to recruit, retain, and motivate tomorrow's employees. Mike also touched on applying speed, agility, and the new lean IT mindset to your technology teams, why the multicultural web of tomorrow is going to be much, much different than the web that we use today. And then he wrapped it all up identifying the critical data points in your business, the real numbers, the real-time numbers that no business leader will be able to afford to ignore in managing a 21st century business. The keynote that he delivered was followed by some breakout sessions, and then we all reconvened for a lunchtime keynote, which was delivered from FastSign's CEO and IFA Executive Committee and board member Catherine Monson, a treasured friend of mine and our guest upcoming Ron Feldman as well. Catherine delivered an insightful digital marketing case study, and she talked about how digital marketing is helping both her company market to their consumers as well as prospective franchisees, and how their company is helping others use digital techniques and technology to grow their own businesses. More breakouts followed Catherine's talk at lunch. And today, we're hearing from other specialists that include another friend of Franchise Today, Glass Doctor CEO Mark Liston, Postnet's President and COO Brian Spindell, Social Geek Radio co-host and Monalto Strategic Accounts Guru Jack Monson hosted a roundtable, and even yours truly as I moderated a panel that spoke about systems reliance for sustainable growth. This is Franchise Today, and we're coming to you live and direct from Dallas, Texas, and we're brought to you by the Franchise Foundry, a business accelerator focused on moving emerging franchise brands forward, and of course by FRM Solutions, offering robust, out-of-the-box software solutions tailored specifically to the needs of franchisors for the management of potential and existing franchised relationships. So if all of this that I just shared with you wasn't enough, the very parts of these events always come down to the networking that we get to do between sessions and in the evening, which last night included about 14 innings of World Series baseball, and that competed a little bit for our attention, as I'm sure Game 2 is going to do for us that are staying over again tonight, not to mention round 3 of the Republican candidate debate tonight, which will quite likely move the needle on the evening conversation in the bar completely away from technology. But, hey, enough of all of that. It's time to say hello to my very good friend, almost family, Ron Feldman, Chief Development Officer for FRANdata. And, gosh, Ron, you wear many more hats than that, but let's open with that one and say welcome to Franchise Today.
Thank you very much, Stan. Glad to be here.
So, Ron, what I like to try doing as we press forth with these podcasts is help our listeners get a deeper and more inside look at some of the people that we bring to talk. Everything we do here on Franchise Today is all about talking sustainable growth in franchising, doing the right things to help franchisors keep their focus on the recurring revenue lines, which are the lines that everybody should be focused on. You're a stalwart in this business, but I would love to take it back a notch or two and dial back to the very beginning for you, because you've been a franchisee, you've been a supplier, you've been a financial guru, a political activist. You've done a lot of things in this world. Where did it all start, though, Ron?
Well, it all started actually with a guy named Anthony Martino. Anthony Martino founded Amco, Mako, and Goddard, 3 national franchise companies. And my wife and I became franchisees, one of the very early franchisees in the Goddard system. And franchising really intrigued me, and this was back in the early 90s. We opened, we operated, and we ultimately exited very happily the Goddard system. And along the way, Tony Martino kind of brought me into his inner circle of friends, which was apparently very tough armor to crack. And he told me of a frustration he had in doing financing for his franchisees. And lo and behold, our company, Siegel Financial Group, which was founded by Bernie Siegel back in the 80s, I had joined him kind of as an independent contractor, became the outsourced franchise finance department for Mako. We were actually since our offices were only 10 minutes apart from each other, we were actually at all of the real estate meetings. We were part of the management team. We were part of the discovery day process when candidates came through, and I learned everything I learned about developing and franchising from that entity, which obviously was a very, very long-held private company, held by Tony until he passed away. And now it's part of Driven Brands. But once I was good enough for Tony Martino, the phone started ringing, and we ended up doing the same thing for about 10 other brands. So,
Ron, before you move forward from there, though, talk a little bit about some of the other iconic names we know in the industry today that were born out of that same generation at Tony's company at Mako.
Iconic people that were from Mako or that generation?
Well, people that we knew back then that were part of those early development years.
Well,
who were some of the people around you then that we know
sure,
that we still know today?
Well, I mean, obviously Doc Cohen comes to mind right away. He was one of the very early influencers for me. Charlie Chase at First Service Brands, another very early influencer. Lane Fisher, the stalwart attorney. Another early influencer, and I guess the common denomination of all of those is the IFA. I mean, the IFA really brings people together, and the IFA gives people the ability to share at a level that I've never seen in any other industry.
And so you move forward from the Mako years, pick up from there, and
sure.
Tell us more about your early years with Siegel.
So I met this guy, Bernie Siegel. We decided to do some business together, and along the way met my now partner, Nate Greenberg, who happened to be Bernie's son-in-law. And we decided in 2005 to buy the company from Bernie as he was turning 65 in 2008. And we had a 3-year exit plan, which we made actually within 2 weeks of the date we had set in 2005. Now that was all good and well, except that we ended up buying this financial services company in May of 2008, which about 4 months later imploded, along with Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns and all those other folks when the financial crash happened. And we went on and the SBA did some really stupid things. I'm pretty straight, and I don't hold back words. And the IFA kind of engaged us, and me specifically, to go up on the Hill and try and change the SBA's new policy of not financing goodwill. And fortunately, we were able to do that. We actually got a bipartisan support of that change to the SBA rules. I was actually in Nancy Pelosi's office, which, if anybody knows my politics, everyone knows that was pretty uncomfortable for me. But we were able to garner the support and got that law changed, and then went on a quest to create the perfect franchise lending platform, but only as a boutique type firm. We weren't going to be all things to everyone in franchising, and the reason for that is all franchise companies are not equal, and so we engaged FRANdata to help us take 4,000 franchise brands down to 50 that we'd actually want to lend to. And we used a lot of complex algorithms and everything that FRANdata had capability to do, and we were quite successful, created Franchise America Finance, and to this day it still goes on every day loaning folks money. But it was only ever meant to be a boutique-type firm. And
so before you move forward into some of the the products that you've helped create with your relationship, even in those early years with FRANdata. It was a different world then in terms of access to capital. I remember that we had an Access to Capital Summit in D.C. about the time maybe that you were sitting with Pelosi's office, and I was introducing a friend in the White House named Don Graves to the IFA, and there was a big summit, wasn't there? I mean, access to capital became almost like a changing and evolving, frightening in that period of time beast. We talk about some of the existential threats today, but those threats began then, didn't they?
Correct, absolutely. Without banks lending to franchise companies, franchising is dead in the water. It is built on the ability to use leverage because there's a proven history and performance of the brands for which the banks are lending to. And banks can know that their risk is mitigated by the fact that they can leverage that past history to see and benchmark where their current borrower is in terms of what their ability to pay back the loans are. And that just shut off in 2008. And it shut off to everybody. It wasn't just franchising. But it became a very critical thing as part of the whole stimulus. The SBA, created a 90% guarantee, and they did all kinds of things that had, that were good-hearted gestures, but had a lot of unintended consequences. And basically, the end result was it took all the risk off of the banks and put it onto the government on a lot of these small business loans without creating the jobs that it was supposed to.
Ron, I have memories too that go back to my earliest days of relationship with you and Nate, and that predates the reset button when it got hit. But even then, in my Wing Zone days, 03, 04, 05, 06, I can remember where relationships that I found through you guys to help me finance some stores, we'd find a bank that really liked the concept and banked my franchisee for one or two, maybe three different deals back to back, and then suddenly the brakes were put on and they'd say, hold on, we can't do any more of these now until we start seeing how they're going to perform. That used to be a common issue, didn't it?
That was a very common issue, and that's when the weighting was more on the borrower and not on the brand. And Wing Zone, by way of disclosure, was an emerging brand at that point. It was not a proven brand. So banks aren't going to dive wholeheartedly into an emerging brand. They're going to try a few and see how it goes. What we've done and what one of our core values at Franchise America Finance and Siegel Financial Group is that we weight the brand more than 50% in every transaction. So we only work with brands that we are confident will pass our bank's due diligence, and that we won't have that issue of they'll try three and go. And that's why it's a boutique firm. We can't be all things to everyone because we're only trying to work with brands that are established. And our plan is really to go very deep into those brands, not work with as many brands, but go very deep into those brands and solve problems that they have from a low of $10,000 to buy a POS system up to $20 million to do a network resale. So we really try and go very deep into a narrow set of brands.
And so this is what we're talking about here is really we're unpacking the situations in time and circumstance that led to the birth of something that became known as the bank credit report. Isn't that right?
The bank credit report is actually a byproduct of what we did to create Franchise America Finance, and it's gone through a couple of iterations over the years. And the bank credit report today remains the standard for which all franchise companies are measured by banks. And it really is only relevant to brands that have a proven track record. And again, it cannot address, and there's no way to address the true credit risk of brands where you're opening unit number 3. And that's where you have to put a much higher weight on the borrower than on the brand when you have emerging brands without a proven track record. So FRANdata spends a lot of time, energy, and money educating the entire lending community. The franchise registry website has over 6,600 lenders that have logins that log in on an average of once or twice a month. And it houses all of the data that banks need to assess and assess risk, really, and decide if they want to make loans to franchise companies.
And so for franchisors that are in those early and emerging stages, their opportunity for getting financing and helping to get their prospective franchisees in a position for opening up a new unit is really going to be found more with companies like Benetrends or the guidance or companies that can help candidates find and access money that doesn't require a look at the brand. Isn't that pretty much the way it is?
That is clearly one of the strategies that can be utilized using your 401k as your partner, basically, to open a business. In many cases, though, you can get one-off loans from banks if you are strong enough financially in an emerging brand. But they're going to put a lot higher weight on you as the borrower and what your outside collateral is and what your credit history is if you go to the 5 C's of credit. And you're going to generally have to put a much higher cash injection in than if you were opening a Sport Clips or a Massage Envy where there's 1,000 units open and they know what the defaults are historically.
So what other options are there for emerging brands and franchisors that are trying to help candidates get financed in early stages, Ron?
Well, I mean, BoeFly is a very good option, really, because they've got such a cross-section of banks that sometimes there's a local bank that's willing to take a one-off risk where a national bank won't. So that would clearly be a good option. You know, all of the providers that are doing the 401k rollover have also a lending component, so they sometimes match the 401k to a loan. And frankly, the franchisor needs to create a toolkit to pitch banks. I mean, I go back to Shelley Sun, early Brightstar days, when she only had a few units open, had the PowerPoint deck on Brightstar, the brand that franchisees could use to go to their bank to see if they could get a loan. There's a little nugget, as Brian Chanel would say, that every emerging franchisor should embrace. Your franchisee doesn't know how to pitch the brand to the franchisor. They might know how to pitch, or to a lender. They know how to pitch themselves sometimes. They don't always know how to pitch themselves because it's usually the very first time they're applying for a business loan. And then the packaging services, the packagers that are out there also know how to create a loan package. If you're in an emerging brand, you can get money. It's just a lot harder. You're not going to get programmatic money. You're not going to get a lending program in an emerging brand like you would in a proven brand. That would be the takeaway.
And then what about those guys that used to finance on equipment and offer roll up of franchise fees into those packages as well? Is that still commonplace now as it was once upon a time?
Stan, I will tell you that it feels like it's 2006 again. There
really?
is and that's really good for everyone trying to get stuff done now, but it's really bad long term. It is as loose as it's ever been. There is some sanity, and we talked about that with the emerging brands. It used to be that all franchises were equal. At least the banks now understand that every brand is not equal. But if you are a proven operator and you're looking to grow or you're looking to refinance and you're not doing it now, you're making a big mistake because, and I've been wrong about this for a long time, one of these days I'll be right and rates will actually go up. But it isn't going to happen this year at this point. And I don't know that it's going to happen in the first quarter, and if it does, it's going to be a very small bump, maybe 25 basis points or a quarter point. But now is the time for proven operators and for franchisors, frankly, to incent their proven operators to grow.
And so emerging brands aren't without hope or without resources and ways to get to the place where, as they begin to grow, they can prepare themselves better for more structured opportunities like those that are provided by FRANdata and the work that you've done there. And I want to leave us plenty of time to talk about that, Ron. I remember when you started talking and Darrell Johnson started talking about bank credit reports and how FDDs were not your friend trying to sell a franchise. If you thought it was a problem in trying to help your candidates understand what they were reading, it was even more problematic trying to get financing. Why don't you help us learn a little bit more about that, how you've taken some of the sting for those companies that your boutique lending is able to work with as concepts further develop and get out of that emerging stage?
Well, one of the things we really drill down on is we give a physical to the brand, and I'm being nice. You know, some brands have accused it of being a proctology exam, and we will actually get a lot of metrics that are important to banks, but that brands just don't put in FDDs. A couple of examples would be average time to break even. Very important metric for a bank, because a bank needs to know how much working capital that borrower needs to have in order to get to break even. And you don't want to overextend working capital and have the borrower tempted to go buy a Porsche, and you don't want to underextend working capital and not have them have enough money to get to where they need to be. And it's different in every brand. That's just one of the things that the bank credit report addresses. It goes into probably 30 different metrics of that brand specifically, and benchmarks it against both a peer group and the industry, and translates your FDD into lender-friendly language. And that's really what the bank credit report has done. However, not all franchisors have embraced that, and even a lot of the big ones haven't embraced it, more because of the work they have to do internally, frankly, than what the cost is. The cost is only $5,000 of that report. So the lenders have asked us, and we're now launching a new product called a Fund Report, FUND, that takes 10 years history of the publicly available information. There's no interaction between FRANdata and the brand, and applies 13 different measurements to it. And we've actually created a score, a fund score, that ranges between 300 and 950 for franchise brands. And that report is being launched actually tomorrow with a webinar to a couple of hundred lenders, and that will be rolling out. So brands that don't have BCRs will still now have another document that can either help them or hurt them, depending on how good their disclosures are in the lending community. And one of the things that's very interesting is there are some very good franchise brands that have very bad scores. And that's because they don't disclose well. And there are some very bad franchise brands that have better than average scores, and that's because they do disclose well. So we actually, as part of growing this and testing this model, we had to change the weighting. And it's now weighted to the point where we're very, very confident that it assesses risk better than any other publicly available information, especially the often mentioned but fatally flawed SBA data. The SBA default rate is wrong. It says on the report that it's wrong, and everyone still uses it. It's one of those things that has boggled my mind for years. So,
you're listening to Franchise Today. I'm Stan Friedman, and we're talking with Ron Feldman, Chief Development Officer of FRANdata. And Ron is giving us some insights into historically how we've gotten to where we are in the world of franchise financing today, the impact that the recession has had short-term back then and then long-term since on access to capital for franchising, and how emerging brands today have tools and resources and ways to get their prospective franchisees capitalized, but at the same time should be thinking ahead and looking forward to some of the products that will enable them as they come through early stage development into maturity to really assure that they're able to get the right franchisees to the finish line and capitalize their multi-unit growth within those brands. Ron, I'm interested in we started by peeling back a little bit on you personally and on how you became involved in franchising. Let's flip gears a little bit and talk about FRANdata and where FRANdata came from, because my earliest memories go back to a guy named Jeff Colton. But tell us about the history of the company and how FRANdata has evolved to become the reliant partner for all things franchising today.
Sure. FRANdata was born in 1989, the same year as my oldest child, so I'll never forget the year. And it was founded by Jeff Colton, who ran it for a number of years and ultimately sold it to a bank, National Cooperative Bank. And National Cooperative Bank had a banker there by the name of Darrell Johnson that ran that business unit. A number of years later, did a management buyout, and now Darrell Johnson is the president, or he's actually CEO. Edith Wiseman is president of FRANdata and the owner of FRANdata. And FRANdata has a database and library going back that far to 1989 of every, and I'll throw a term out that will date everyone, UFOC and FDD. On just about every brand. We have about 40,000 documents in our library that we use to measure the industry with. Franchising is the only industry that FRANdata is involved in. And basically, I joined FRANdata having been a consumer of FRANdata's services. So I knew what the capabilities were, and it's interesting because FRANdata is one of those companies that has a very trusted name, a very trusted brand, and not too many people know of all of its capabilities. And one of the reasons that I joined the company was to try and be the preacher that let everyone know what FRANdata's capabilities really are. That is what you'll be seeing a new website. You'll be seeing a whole bunch of stuff coming out of FRANdata in the next quarter that will more properly let the world know what FRANdata is capable of doing.
So most franchisors get exposed to Darrell and to you as you speak at industry conferences, and I think that there's a pretty limited scope of understanding that most franchisors would have. They hear Darrell do his report card at the Franchise Update Conference. They hear him giving benchmarking numbers of industry stats and some of the issues that are government-related as impacts franchising. But on a day-to-day basis, describe some of the core services. What are some of the reporting tools and mechanisms that franchisors probably don't know that they can get from you and from FRANdata to help them assess markets and useful information about the brands that they're trying to develop?
Sure. FRANdata has basically four constituencies of clients. One is franchisors, obviously. The other is suppliers. The third would be lenders and PE groups, financial clients, and the fourth is the IFA. FRANdata is and has been and continues to be the research arm of the IFA. In terms of franchisor services, we do benchmarking studies on just about anything you can think of. We've done studies on impact policy to franchise offerings to same-store sales analysis to adoption and usage of digital marketing platforms. There's actually there's a report out that we did with Geo Digital that's going to be out in the public domain. It might already be out in the public domain on how franchisors use digital marketing and how and which methods they use and where they're spending their money. It's really a very interesting report. We look at operational benchmarking. We've done org chart growth analysis. A company came to us and said, we're at 200 units now. I need to see what my org chart's going to look like at 250, 300, and 400. Can you look at the other groups in my peer in a peer group and let me know where my hires are going to be? So many different categories, but it's all based on custom research. So if you have any problem or any question as a franchisor that you have relative to what's my future going to look like, how am I how am I stacking up against my competition? And by the way, your competition is not just people in your industry. If you're talking about franchise development competition, your competition is everyone in your investment size group. Mm-hmm. And a lot of franchisors don't get that. If they're in healthcare, they say, I want to look at the other healthcare companies. And I say to them, well, let's look at all the other companies that cost $200,000 to get into. The only outlier there is really food. It's food and non-food, but in food, it would be all the food brands that are in that investment size group or based on the segment. But in non-food, it's clearly the money talks and the amount of the investment will drive who a candidate's going to be in one of those brands. We've done a lot of work in the last couple of years on international development, and that international development is very, very hot right now. We've done a lot of studies for franchisors on what the best ways for them to internationally develop are, whether it's a large master or a number of masters. We've done a lot of work with that, and we've done all the way down to let's compare item 19s and how can we better market our item 19 to lenders. I will tell you that in terms of item 19, if your item 19 has only gross sales in it, you might as well not have one.
Right.
It's not going to mean anything to a prospective franchisee, and it's really not going to mean anything to a bank. We're seeing the item 19 quality go up dramatically. I think that's a byproduct of the crash and the recession and franchisors needing to have more transparency. And quite frankly, if it doesn't happen proactively, it's going to happen with regulation and legislation, as we see in all these state-initiated franchise relationship bills. And frankly, there's a bill being pitched in Minnesota at the federal level that is, if you read it, you'd understand why we need to do this ourselves.
And it's not just the maturation of what goes into an item 19, but we're seeing far greater percentages of franchisors who've had the wake-up call and come to the realization that if they don't have one, they need one, and if they can't produce one that's worth having, why are they even franchising? Isn't that the case?
Absolutely. If your I'll go all the way back to the beginning of the conversation with Tony Martino. One of the most important lines I've ever learned in franchising. Franchising is easy, just make sure your franchisees make money. And if you take every decision, yep. And if you take every decision that you make as a franchisor and filter it against that sentence, you'll run a better franchise organization.
Is there a benchmark, Ron, for back to the emerging brands? You know that in the early years when you look at emerging brands and you look at their financials, you're going to see a bigger number on the initial revenue or fee revenue from initial fee line than you will from recurring. But is there a formula for when that intersection should occur? Is there some kind of a benchmark for when recurring should start passing initial and you're living on your royalty?
Sure. We've actually at FRANdata trademarked a term called recurring revenue self-sufficiency. And that is one of the big metrics that banks use in lending to franchises. And it really depends on the brand, and it depends on whether the brand's operating company units and whether the profits from those company units are being moved up into the franchisor entity, or if those company units are covering the salaries of some of the franchisor employees. It is such a muddy water to understand how I see FDDs with the franchisor entity having, no revenue because it's a startup, but they have 9 people on their staff in the FDD. And I'm sitting there scratching my head saying, well, how are they getting paid? So, and they're getting paid. I don't know anybody that's really working for free. So the issue really is in being transparent from day one and letting everyone know what's going on. And Goddard, my experience with Goddard, and to this day, I consider Goddard's Item 19 one of the best Item 19s, if not the best Item 19 in all of franchising. But they published every number to every franchisee every month. Everyone knew what everyone else was doing.
Pretty transparent.
Yeah, can't be more transparent to that. And if you look at the way they've grown, you can see that it's really worked. Now they have a business model that works. You can be transparent, but have a business model that doesn't work, and you shouldn't be franchising. And
so at the very least, I was going to ask you, at the very least, what are the line items that a franchisor, you're saying it can't just be top line. What would a good Item 19 include?
The Item 19 should get down to the unit level EBITDA. That would be a best practice. EBITDA is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. Also known as cash flow. It's actually not real cash flow because it doesn't take into account what CapEx you might have to make over the years to keep your asset producing that income. But that would be the way that you would want to engage both prospective franchisees, and especially if you're looking at getting multi-branded folks, if you're trying to get into that pool where people are operating 8 Jersey Mikes and they want to have a pizza concept and they're looking at your fast casual pizza concept. There's how many of those now? If you're not telling them up front, they're just going to keep reading the FDDs until they find one that does. You're not going to get the attention that you should get from these more sophisticated franchisees.
So, Ron, I can remember when I was still a franchisor and was looking for help with what could I bolt onto, what could I take could I find a potential franchisee in a specific market that might be an existing franchisee of another competitive brand that might bolt well with my concept and not have restrictive covenants that would prohibit him from buying another branded franchise. And I came to FRANdata to help me find out who those people might be. That was a pretty specific ask that I needed. It didn't take me very long to get the information I was looking for, and relative to my need, it really didn't cost a lot either. What can you talk to that will help most of our audience understand that FRANdata is not just there for legacy brands and not just there for the big guys that are already large in scope, but as a tool and a resource to help emerging brands continue in their quest for sustainable and sensible growth? How does a franchisor best engage with your company? What kind of a timeline does it take for you to learn about them and they about you? And is it within reach for most budgets, or is it something that is reserved for just those who can that can pay premium dollars for your kinds of services?
Well, to answer your question, day one is when you really should engage with us, and research should be part of your annual budget, whether it's with us or with, if you're in the food space, one of the food research companies, or you really need to get intelligence. And we have a document that we've created called the Emerging Franchisor Capital Access Toolkit, which actually lays out all the things that emerging franchisors should do to get access to capital. And if anybody would like to get that, they can certainly just shoot me an email personally, rfeldman@frandata.com, and I'll be happy to send it out to you. But emerging franchisors are a big part of our business because they need to know what the competitive landscape is, and looking at other FDDs
right.
just isn't really enough to do that. Your particular question about the ask that you had back in the Wing Zone days is, we get questions all the time, and we sell contact lists. We have every franchisee in America in our database. So we sell contact lists to franchisors all the time of franchisees in non-competitive or prohibited brands in the markets that they want to grow. So that is something we do, absolutely every day at FRANdata. The other thing that an emerging brand should really do is look at benchmarking and doing that org chart projection and doing all the things that they need to do. And I'll go back to Shelley Sun, who's one of my dearest friends in franchising. She told me 6 months before to the day she was going to be recurring revenue self-sufficient. She had plotted that out in May for November. And she said she was off by a week. She was disappointed. But if you're not planning for that, if you're not planning for that, and you're just going to keep hiring too fast, or you're going to spend money on portals too much, or there is a balance to getting to that intersection. By the way, the general rule of thumb is 100 units. That's the general rule of thumb, where the royalties and the recurring revenue will cover 100% of the G&A outside of selling costs. Now, I've seen that happen in brands with 25 units. Those brands had infrastructure covered by corporate unit profits. So it is something that, and by the way, you'll never get that out of an FDD. It's just not part of what an FDD is. But that's the point where, as a franchisor, you take a deep breath and you say, all right, I'm not bulletproof because nobody's bulletproof, but I might be bullet resistant now. And now what can I do to really scale this business? But there's a rush to get to recurring revenue self-sufficiency. And I see a lot of franchisors doing the wrong things, and it's much more important to know what not to do than it is to know what to do. And that's kind of one of the biggest values that I think we've brought to brands is, they come to us with their strategy and we analyze it and say, well, I don't know if this is the right way for you to be doing this. Why don't you think about doing it this way? And FRANdata is not afraid. One of the other things FRANdata is, and we coined the term with a tongue in cheek. We're Switzerland. We're completely objective. We don't take any money for advertising on our website. We don't take any commissions from anybody. We get paid for what we do, and we give it to you straight. So if we're not afraid to deliver bad news. If you looked at Forbes, and I guess it came out in June, there were the 30 best and 30 worst. Well, I can tell you there were 30 very happy brands and 30 less happy brands. But Forbes engaged us to create a data set and a methodology to measure franchise companies, and we put it out there with our name on it. So we're not afraid to do that, and we think it's for the betterment of the industry that everyone understands and adopts best practices. On the supplier side,
to the point.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay, and on the supplier side, we get engaged by every company that you can. Fortune 5 companies hire FRANdata on strategies to better penetrate franchising. Our most famous customer is probably a company that everybody uses every day named Google. And I think Google has pretty good access to research on their own. Yet they came and engaged us not once but twice to help them in better penetrating the franchise business model. Anheuser-Busch, another name that everybody knows, one of our clients. I could rattle them off, but many of them are under NDA, and we only talk about the ones that we really can. So,
but I think the key message that I'm taking from this segment of our conversation, Ron, is that nobody's too small, and it's never too soon. And if we took a line from 7 Habits and Dr. Stephen Covey, it would be begin with the end in mind and know what you're doing and research it well. And just as you've got to prove concept, you've got to prove more about market penetration and who your right people should be. And knowing what you don't know is what you can buy with data that you get from FRANdata.
It's not just data; it's analysis and 100 years of experience collectively that we have in the office.
What percentage of that comes with consultancy, Ron? So you talked a little bit about companies that come to you to analyze what they've already got. do companies come to you with a clean slate, and do you advise and give counsel for what somebody that doesn't have this mapped out yet should be doing?
We advise on the business model. We don't advise on practices within the business model. So we can't tell you, if you're a food company, how to lower your cost of chicken wings. That's not. There are other people that are out there that know that we're not experts, but we are subject matter experts on the franchise business model. So if you're looking at growth strategy or support level benchmarking or anything related to the franchise business model, we do a lot of consultancy and advising. We do a lot of it with suppliers, more with suppliers than franchisors, and a lot of it with banks, obviously. And I will tell you that every PE transaction that you've read, we've probably been involved in it in one way or another. But we don't talk about those things because we're under NDAs in all those transactions. So PE firms hire us to validate assumptions. That's a big thing that PE firms hire us for on the buy side, or to do a competitive benchmark analysis, those types of things. So it's very interesting. And the other thing that's interesting is when we just get every FDD coming across, and a couple of the things that scare me a little bit about the whole industry is, you don't need to have an operating unit to be a franchisor. And that's pretty scary. All you need is an FDD.
Wow. So that's back to no proof of concept, right?
Right. And that's where we have to begin as an industry to self-regulate. And if we don't, Keith Ellison's or Kevin Ellison, I think his name is Kevin Ellison's bill in Minnesota, it's going to gain some legs. And that's not all bad. There's a lot of stuff in there that's very good. The other thing that we're seeing also is state examiners coming in and ripping apart Item 19s. If your Item 19 doesn't include 100% of your units, there are registration states that you should not go into because they'll make you change your Item 19 to include all of the units in your system. A lot of brands just put the top 2 quarters into their Item 19. They don't bother to put the bottom 2 quarters in. And that's clearly not transparent. So it all goes back to that sentence, Stan. Franchising's easy. Just make sure your franchisees make money.
Ron, you've done a tremendous job of taking us through the history of where we are and how we got here. I don't want us to end this last segment politically, but what I would like to do is ask for your crystal ball looking ahead. You brought up PEs, and that segues well to the last set of topics I'd like to discuss, because we all are exposed in ways now that make it very apparent to us, regardless of our politics or our personal beliefs, that as a business model, the existential threats that are coming at franchising now are almost overwhelming. All of that said, I don't see any shortage of private equity companies looking to enter the space. I don't see any shortage of companies looking to either create or add to existing portfolios in the franchising space. So to me, there's something of a dichotomy that I'm going to ask you to speak to between, oh my God, the sky is falling, and look how many people are still looking to invest in our space. So there's a fuzzy line there, Ron. Help us earmark it. Where is it really at?
It's funny because I asked the same question of a panel at the Springboard Convention, a panel of all PE folks. I'll give you the answer that I got, and the answer that I got was it's too early to tell, and they're going to err on the side of deploying capital into the franchise market until they learn otherwise. So there's no discount being taken right now. Banks are not looking at $15 minimum wage when they're underwriting loans, unless the loan's in Los Angeles or Seattle or one of those cities. And it's not there yet. The existential threat really is the NLRB and the joint employer definition. Everything else, all the state bills and they're all fights that need to be fought. But they're not, in my opinion, and this is just me speaking, not the IFA, they're not an existential threat to the business model. The NLRB, however, and if you peel back the onion, it is really the Service Employee International Union that's funding this entire effort. I've heard numbers as high as $100 million that they have spent to try and unionize the franchise industry by creating this joint employer definition, which allows them to go after the brand and not each individual franchisee. And that, to me, is an existential threat because, and you're seeing in McDonald's now in LA, they're putting in ordering kiosks like they have in France and all the other countries that are very high wage states. So the skilled labor market will continue to grow and the unskilled labor market will continue to shrink. But that's the fight that needs to be fought at every level by everyone in franchising, franchisors and franchisees. Unions are in the business of creating dues to sustain themselves. There was a time in this country where unions were very important, but right now, it's not. There's no sweatshops happening in the United States right now like there were at the turn of the century.
Interesting stuff, Ron. Ron, as we wrap up, is there anything that I should have asked you and didn't that you'd want to share with the audience that will help them better understand how to engage the services of FRANdata and learn more about how, even for emerging and startup brands, they can begin improving their lives and their businesses for themselves and their franchisees as quickly as getting in touch with you guys?
Well, I guess not. I think we've covered a lot of things. But we, just some anecdotal points. We've worked with over 3,100 franchise brands, from startup to maturity. We are the library of the numbering system that all franchising is. It's called the FRANds number, which actually stands for FRANdata Unique Numbering System. That's been adopted by the SBA, and there's nothing we haven't seen, or don't have the ability to research and find out. So whether you are a franchisor, a supplier, a lender, or a PE firm, we can help you. We are not Boston Consulting. We are not McKinsey. Our fees aren't like those, and we are cognizant of what the market can tolerate in terms of research budgets. That said, we do stellar work. You can talk to any of our prior customers, and everybody is. We will not accept anybody not being thrilled with what we do.
Let's wrap it with your email address one more time, Ron, and the URL for those that want to learn more about FRANdata before they reach out to you.
Sure. The URL is www.frandata.com, FRANDATA.com. And my email is rfeldman, RFELDMAN, @frandata.com.
Ron, I want to thank you on behalf of Paul and myself and, of course, our audience. I'm going to miss you next week at Restaurant Finance, but for those of you that will be at the West Coast Franchise Expo, November 12th through 14 in Anaheim, I'll look forward to seeing you there. Or, again, at the Emerging Franchisor Conference in Miami, November 18th and 19th, all of which are sponsored in part by FRM Solutions, and I'll look forward to seeing and greeting as many of you as are attending at either of those two events. Paul returns next week and will be joined by yet another financial guru, or not a financial guru, actually a franchise guru in the franchising world, Jennifer Cushell, founder of IFA's Next Gen program and CEO of YSN, which stands for Your Success Now. This is a program and an initiative that Jennifer created to help people achieve extraordinary things with their lives and their careers. Until then, this is Stan Friedman wishing you the very best in this great thing we call franchising. And if Paul were here, he'd say it himself, Franchise Today is out.
When you're part of a military family, you understand sacrifice and support. At American Public University, we honor your dedication by extending our military tuition savings to your extended family. Parents, spouses, legal partners, siblings, and dependents all qualify for APU's preferred military rate of just $250 per credit hour for undergraduate and master's level programs. American Public University. Value for the whole family. Learn more at apu.apus.edu/military.